There are stories the world sees. And then there are stories the world is never meant to understand. Welcome to Twisted Chapter, where reality is not merely reported, but unraveled layer by layer, until the hidden architecture of power, conflict, and consequence stands exposed. Tonight's narrative is not just another headline. It is a fracture in the fabric of global order. A moment where diplomacy has faltered, where defiance has risen, and where a single decision, quietly uttered behind closed doors, now echoes across continents with the force of inevitability. Iran has said no, and in that refusal lies a chain reaction so profound that what follows may not only redefine this war, but reshape the future of international power itself. But here, we do not chase noise. We pursue truth beneath the surface. We dissect the unspoken motives, the strategic illusions, and the silent calculations that nations would rather keep hidden. So if you are drawn to stories that challenge perception, narratives that demand intellect, and revelations that linger long after the screen fades to black, then you are exactly where you need to be. Before we descend deeper into this unfolding crisis, take a moment to like this video, share your perspective in the comments, and subscribe to Twisted Chapter, because the world's most important stories are never as simple as they seem. And here, we reveal the twist in every chapter. Now, let us begin. Chapter 1. The moment everything changed. There are rare inflection points in history, moments so deceptively simple, so linguistically brief, that they pass through the world as nothing more than a word, and yet, in their wake, they leave entire geopolitical architectures irreversibly altered. This is one of those moments, not marked by explosions, not heralded by sirens, but delivered with something far more dangerous: clarity. Iran has said a no, a word so small, yet so absolute in its consequence. This was not the language of hesitation, not the cautious ambiguity of diplomacy, not the carefully engineered silence that often conceals negotiation. No, this was something far more deliberate, a rejection articulated with precision, a refusal framed with intent, a message designed not merely to decline an offer, but to redefine the balance of power itself. Because what stood before Iran was not just a proposal. It was, in essence, an ultimatum disguised as peace. A framework reportedly constructed by the United States. One that sought not only to halt the current escalation, but to fundamentally recalibrate Iran's strategic posture for decades to come. At its core, the demands were transformative. The dismantling of nuclear infrastructure, effectively erasing years of technological progression and geopolitical leverage. The reduction of missile capabilities, limiting not only offensive reach, but defensive deterrence in an increasingly volatile region. And perhaps most critically, the relinquishment of influence over the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow corridor of water, yet one of immeasurable global consequence. A passage through which the lifeblood of the modern economy flows: oil, energy, stability itself. To concede that choke point is to surrender leverage over the world's most fragile equilibrium. And Iran understood this, which is why the response was not merely rejection. It was condemnation. The proposal was described as biased, structurally unjust, and fundamentally one-sided in its architecture of expectation. In other words, peace was being offered, but only on terms that required submission. And so Iran chose defiance. But here is where the story deepens. Because this refusal was never just about the deal. It was about perception, about signaling to allies, to adversaries, and to the global audience watching with restrained anticipation that Iran is neither isolated nor desperate, that it retains agency, that it retains leverage, and most importantly, that it is willing to endure. In that single word, no, Iran did more than reject a proposal. It disrupted a narrative. It challenged the assumption that pressure inevitably leads to compliance. And in doing so, it transformed a fragile diplomatic window into something far more volatile. Because when negotiation collapses at this level, what fills the vacuum is rarely peace. It is escalation. Measured, calculated, but escalating nonetheless. And now, the world stands at the edge of that transition, watching, waiting, and perhaps underestimating just how far this moment will reach. Because history has taught us one undeniable truth: the most dangerous turning points are not always the loudest. Sometimes, they begin with a single word. Chapter 2. The War Behind the Headlines. To comprehend the true magnitude of Iran's refusal, one must first move beyond the surface of headlines and into the deeper architecture of the conflict itself. Because this war was never a singular event. It was an accumulation, a convergence of tensions long incubated in silence, strategic rivalries, ideological fractures, and decades of mutual suspicion layered beneath the fragile veneer of diplomacy. What the world now witnesses is not the beginning, but the unveiling. The ignition point came when the United States, alongside its strategic allies, initiated a series of calculated strikes against Iranian military and infrastructural targets. On paper, it was designed as a demonstration of dominance, swift in execution, precise in impact, and limited in scope. A message, not a war. Or so it was believed. But history has a way of defying intention. Because the assumption underpinning that operation was fundamentally flawed. That power, when displayed with enough precision, would compel restraint. Instead, it provoked resistance. What followed was not containment, but expansion. Not resolution, but recursion. The conflict began to evolve, adapting in complexity with each passing moment. What was once a direct confrontation transformed into a multidimensional theater of engagement, where battles were no longer confined to visible fronts. Missiles began to traverse borders with calculated frequency, each launch not merely an act of aggression, but a statement of capability. Proxy networks, long established, deeply embedded, were activated across the region, extending the conflict into shadows where attribution becomes ambiguous and retaliation becomes complicated. And beneath it all, an economic undercurrent began to surge. Because modern warfare is no longer waged solely with weapons. It is waged through disruption, through pressure, through the strategic manipulation of systems upon which the world depends. And this is where Iran's response reveals its true sophistication. Because rather than engaging in symmetrical escalation, meeting force with force in predictable patterns, Iran chose asymmetry. They turned to geography, to leverage, to inevitability. The Strait of Hormuz, a narrow maritime passage, almost inconspicuous on a map, yet indispensable to the global economy, became the focal point of this strategy. Nearly one-fifth of the world's oil supply moves through this corridor. It is not merely a route. It is a lifeline. And Iran did not need to dominate it completely. They only needed to control its uncertainty, to introduce risk, to elevate tension, to remind the world that stability, in this region, is never guaranteed. And then, they acted, not with spectacle, but with precision. Shipping routes were disrupted. Naval movements intensified. Signals, both overt and covert, were sent, until the unthinkable became reality. The strait was effectively closed. And in that moment, the conflict transcended its regional boundaries. Because when the flow of energy is threatened, the world does not watch from a distance. It feels it. Markets react. Economies tremble. Alliances are tested. And neutrality becomes increasingly difficult to maintain. This is the war behind the headlines. Not just a battle of weapons, but a contest of systems, of endurance, of who can exert the greatest pressure without collapsing under its weight. And perhaps most critically, of who truly understands the difference between power and control. Chapter 3. The Global Shockwave. When the Strait of Hormuz was disrupted, the consequences were immediate. Oil prices surged beyond $110 per barrel. Stock markets trembled. Supply chains faltered. And suddenly, a regional war became a global crisis. But here's what most people don't realize. This is no longer just a military conflict. It is an economic siege. By leveraging geography, Iran has transformed itself into a gatekeeper of global energy. Some analysts now argue that Iran holds more leverage today than at any point in recent history, despite sustained bombardment. And that changes everything. Because wars are not won by force alone. They are won by control. Chapter 4. The Dangerous Game of Power. Behind closed doors, diplomacy continues. But it is fragile, uncertain, and dangerously close to collapse. The United States has extended deadlines, threatened further strikes, and even prepared additional troop deployments to the region. Meanwhile, Iran is not backing down. Instead, it is recalibrating, launching counterproposals, setting its own conditions, and reinforcing its alliances across the Middle East. Even more concerning, civilian warnings have been issued near U.S. bases. Missile exchanges are intensifying, and the possibility of a broader regional war is no longer theoretical. It is imminent. Chapter 5. The Illusion of Control. At first glance, it may appear that the United States still holds the upper hand. Superior military, global alliances, technological dominance. But war is not merely a contest of strength. It is a contest of endurance. And here lies the paradox. The longer this conflict continues, the more leverage shifts. Because Iran is not fighting to win quickly, it is fighting to outlast, to reshape the battlefield, to force a negotiation on its own terms. And perhaps most importantly, to demonstrate that even the most powerful nations can be resisted. What happens next will shock you. So what happens now? There are only three possible paths forward. Path 1. Escalation. The war intensifies. More strikes, more destruction, possibly even a direct confrontation on an unprecedented scale. Path 2. Stalemate. A prolonged conflict with no clear victor, bleeding economies, destabilizing regions, and exhausting global patience. Path 3. A new deal. Not the one that was rejected, but a different one. A deal forged not from dominance, but from necessity. Because here is the truth no one wants to admit. Neither side can afford to lose, but neither side is willing to concede. And in that tension lies the most dangerous outcome of all. As we arrive at the threshold of this unfolding narrative, one truth becomes unmistakably clear. The world is shifting, and the consequences of today's decisions will echo far beyond tomorrow. What you have witnessed is not merely a story. It is a glimpse into the forces quietly shaping our collective future. Before you go, I want to sincerely thank you for watching all the way to this point. Your time, your attention, and your curiosity mean more than words can fully convey. I deeply appreciate your continued support and your commitment to engaging with these conversations. If you value depth, clarity, and thought-provoking insight, then I invite you to become a part of this growing intellectual community. Kindly subscribe to this channel so you never miss the stories that truly matter. And do not keep this knowledge to yourself, share it. Invite your friends, your family, and every curious mind around you to join us here, where we explore the world beyond the headlines. Keep watching, keep learning, and keep questioning. Until next time, stay informed, stay perceptive, and always question what lies beneath the surface.